This shir is usually either the Parshas HaShavua or in Yonah D'Yoma. And today's shir is almost Parshas HaShavua and definitely in Yonah D'Yoma. What do I mean? Last week's Parsha we read two psukim. Parshas V'eschanan. Shomar lecho v'shmor nafshecho moed. ונשמרתם לנפשתיכם. What do I mean in Yonah D'Yoma? In the recent months, whenever I say in Yonah D'Yoma, it's always associated with COVID-19, with Corona. Today, the focus is not on Corona, but rather Bein Hazmanim. To my terrible dismay, every year we know tragedy in Bein Hazmanim. Every year, without exception. In these 3 weeks, from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Chodesh Elul, we're losing children. Kids drown, fall off cliffs. It's just Yud Aled Av today. Just 3 days after Tisha B'Av. Friday, Yud Av, 1 day after Tisha B'Av, a yeshiva boy was critically injured when he drove a jeep that overturned in Midbar Yehuda, in the desert, in the south. Yesterday, a yeshiva boy was critically injured in a bicycle accident. I think we don't do enough in educating our children. I think this should be part of the curriculum in cheders and yeshivas. How important it is not to put your life in jeopardy, and what it requires. Some of our children aren't aware how dangerous it is to go into the ocean, or the Kinneret, or the Yarden, or in Chutz La'aretz it's the same when there is no lifeguard. So the Kinneret looks so peaceful when you look from the shore. But under the water, it's not so peaceful. The ocean is tranquilizing. It's wonderful to see, but it's quite turbulent. And it's a terrible sakana to go into any body of water, whether it's a lake or a river or the ocean, if there's no lifeguard. You should never get into a boat without a life jacket, without a life vest. Never. So we're losing people all the time that fall off boats. Boats capsize, turn over. And if you don't have an efficient, real life vest, or don't get into a boat. Kids die from dehydration in the desert, and they're not aware how much water you need to take along. So it's just that our children aren't aware how dangerous this world is, and many of the activities could jeopardize your life. So these halachas, they're primary sources in Shulchan Aruch are 3 different Samonim, 2 in Yoreh De'ah, 1 in Choshe Mishpat. Kuf Tet Zayin, Kuf Ayin Tes in Yoreh De'ah, Tov Chov Zayin in Choshe Mishpat. Many sources in Shas, Brochas Lamed Beis Umed Beis, Shabbos Lamed Beis Umed Aleph, Tanas Chof Umed Beis, Avodah Zorah Yud Beis, and many other sources, in which Chazal go into detail, specifying various activities that are dangerous, that are prohibited. And one of the most important sources, maybe the most central source, is a story told in Brochas Lamed Beis Umed Beis. Masa b'chosed echod shohoyu mispalal b'derach. Va'ava leyodai sar, an important government official, a cabinet minister. Nosan loy sholem, v'loy hichzir lo sholem. So this high-ranking government official said hello, and the chosed didn't respond because he was in the middle of davening. And this official himten lo yad shesiyem tfilosoi. La'achar shesiyem tfilosoi yom eloi reika. So the non-Jew tells the chosed, you're an ha'aretz, you're a reik. בתורסכו כסיב ושומר לכו ונשמור נפשכו מאוד. v'chsiv ונשמרתם לאוהד לנפשתיכם. So obviously that non-Jewish official was familiar with the Hebrew Bible, and he knew to quote psukim of Toraseinu Agdosha, both psukim and Parshas Veschanan. Lama lo yachzartu lisholem, ilu hoyis yechoitech es roishcho b'sayef, mi hoyu toiveya dimcho. If I would cut your head off with my sword, nobody would avenge, and nobody would demand an explanation. So how did you dare not to respond when I greeted you? And the Chosed says, Hamten li ad she'afayescho bidvorim. Wait a moment, let me apologize and explain. If you would have an audience with a king, and a mortal, a human being would turn to you and say, how do you do? Good morning, how are you? Would you respond? And the minister says, of course not. When you are in the presence of the king, you don't respond to others. So the Chosed explains, and I was in the presence of the king of all kings, of Melech Malchei Amlochim, so how would you expect that I respond to a human being as important as he may be? So the story had a happy end. And the minister said, okay, you're right. The Marsha on the spot comments that this guy obviously was familiar with the Bible, but he wasn't a Talmud Chacham. And that's a mistake, because both these psukim do not refer to staying away from physical danger, but rather they're all about spirituality. So the Pasuk says, "V'mi goy godol asher lo chukim v'mishpotim tzadikim kachol ha'toiro azois asher anoichi noisel lefnechem hayoim rak eshomar locho v'shmor nafshecho moed pen tishkach es advorim asher ra'u einecho." And what does that mean, advorim asher ra'u beinecho? The Pasuk goes on, "Yoim asher omadeto lefnei Hashem elokecho b'choirev." Eshomar locho v'shmor nafshecho moed pen tishkach es advorim asher ra'u einecho refers to Ma'amad Har Sinai. ונשמרתם מאוד לנפשתיכם כי לא ראיתם תמונת כל. These psukim refer to Ruchnius, to Avodah Zarah, and they're not about the prevention of danger. That's what the Mashal comments. Ofer ani tachas kapes raglav shel Adonenu Amarsha. But the Rambam, Hilchas Rutzeach v'Shmiras HaNefesh, Perek Yud Aleph Halacha Daled, quotes these very same two psukim as the source of the mitzvah to stay away from danger. And the Shulchan Aruch follows in the footsteps of the Rambam, Choshe Mishpat Tov Chov Zayin Siv Ches. And there's no other source in Shas that these psukim do refer to staying away from danger. So Lulei Divrei HaMarsha, to me it would be a Milsa de Pshita. Yes, according to the story told in Brochas Lamed Beis and Weiss, it was a non-Jew that quoted those psukim. But if that's what the Gemara quotes in Brochas Lamed Beis, it's no longer the Chachma of a non-Jew. It becomes Chazal. Chazal don't tell stories. I would guess and imagine that between that non-Jewish official and the Jew, probably some other words were said as well. I could only imagine, after the Chosed gave his explanation, the non-Jewish official said, wow, you're great, you're bright, so please give regards to your family. How many kids do you have? Where do you live? Probably they had a chat. But Chazal aren't stam storytellers. Every word in Chazal conveys a message that is important and eternal. You know, it was just Tisha B'Av. So the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa is 2.5 blatta Masechet Gittin. Is that all there is to tell about the Churban? Hundreds of books, maybe thousands, were written about the Holocaust and World War II. Probably millions of pages. And it still ain't the entire story. To tell the entire story of Churban Beis Hamikdash would probably require 1,000 books. So Chazal are never a comprehensive history. It's not what they had in mind. And it's never the entire story. Whatever is written in the Sugya and Gittin, Nun Vav Nun Zayin, and an equivalent Sugya in Tanis Yerushalmi Dav Chov Daled, every line conveys a message. Every line comes to teach eternal message of Torah, of Chassidus, of Hanhaga. So if Chazal quote those two psukim, yes, it was a non-Jew that said that, but that's not relevant. It's the Gemara and Brochas Lamed Beis, and therefore the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch do quote these very two psukim as the source, the halachic source of Shmiras Haguf Nefesh. So it's a mitzvah diuraisa, and probably defined as an aseh velo ta'aseh, because ונשמרתם, hishom alacho. Kol mokem shenem rashom pevayal is a lo ta'aseh. But anyway, just like Pikuach Nefesh overrides all other mitzvahs, the opposite of Pikuach Nefesh, putting your life in danger, is one of the most terrible avedas. Even if ultimately you survived, but you were over on Yishom Alocho v'shmor nafsho humoid unishmartem ha'oid lenafshteichem. So let's go back to the story. So how did the Chosed Dir not to respond? So he has a beautiful mashal, but didn't he put his life in danger? Was he allowed to keep on davening and not respond to the minister? We have two explanations, two tirutzim, the Taz and the Magen Avraham, not in the same source. Taz Samach Vav Aleph, Magen Avraham Kuv Daled Omid Aleph. So the Taz says, Taz has a diak in the Lashon of the Gemara, which is interesting. So when the Sar tells the Chosid, if I would cut your head off, nobody would demand an explanation. And I wouldn't have to be your liability to anyone. So how did you dare not to respond to my greetings? The Chosid says, Hamten li ad she'afayescha b'devarim. Wait, give me an opportunity to apologize and to explain. So the Taz says, how did he say, wait? So the Taz says the Chassid was aware that by law, the minister can't just kill him. He needs to give an opportunity to explain. He has the right to respond. So he was confident the guy can't just kill me. He must give me an opportunity to have my word. Magen Avraham Kuv Daled, slightly different. The Magen Avraham says that the Chassid was so convinced that his mashal was so beautiful and convincing that he had no doubt, there was no doubt in his mind that he'll convince the minister to let him go. Ofrani tachas kapes ragleim. If it would be a question in halacha, of course I can't be choilak on the Magen Avraham or the Taz, but I do find both terutzim to be a great doichak and not so very reasonable, because the Taz says, well, the Chassid was aware that the minister can't just kill him. Really? Was the minister lying when he said, Imoiti choitech es roishchu b'sayef mi hayo tovayadimcha? Really? Going back 2,000 years? If a non-Jewish minister would kill a Jew, would he be court-martialed? I don't think so. I think when the Sar says, if I would cut your head off, nobody would care, that was true. So I think the Chassid did put his life in jeopardy. So the Mashal says, the Chassid was convinced that his argument is so convincing. But how was he convinced that he'll have an opportunity to give his argument? So when the guy says, good morning, and he ignores him, maybe he'll never have an opportunity to tell his beautiful mushal. And the Sar will just take out his sword and cut him to pieces right there and then. So I find both the Magen Avraham and the Taz to be somewhat unreasonable and a big doichek. Ibidi d'Italia, wouldn't it be more pushy to say, this was a chassid in the days of Chazal. Obviously was a Talmud Chacham as well, because otherwise he couldn't be a chassid. The Mishnah says in Avos, Loi ama oretz chassid velo bur yerei chet. So if he was a chassid, and Chazal defined him as a chassid, he must have been a great Talmud Chacham. And if he was a Talmud Chacham, we need a halachic explanation. How did he put his life in jeopardy? But he was a chassid. And the Shulchan Aruch writes in Hilchos Tefillah, Chasidim Rishonim Hayom again, Korev lespashtus hagashmius. Wouldn't it be more simple to say that the chassid wasn't even aware that somebody said good morning? He didn't hear. When he was engrossed in the depth of Tefillas HaAmida, he was like a malach. Korev lespashtus hagashmius. He wasn't aware that somebody greeted him. He didn't hear. And even if he did hear, but you're not allowed to look out in the middle of davening, in the middle of the Shmoines, you're not allowed to look out. So he heard someone saying good morning. That might have been his neighbor, the janitor of his building, maybe the garbage collector, maybe a shepherd. Could have been 1,000 different people. How was he supposed to guess that it was a minister or a high-ranking official? So what did he do wrong? What did he do wrong? So I just mentioned the sugya of Kamsa Bar Kamsa a few minutes ago, and he said there's an equivalent story in Yerushalmi, telling the story of Churban Abayis, various different details, different stories in Yerushalmi, not the same as in the Bavli. One of the stories told in Yerushalmi was about Ben Koziba. Ben Koziba was the Jewish military hero. He was #1 commander of the Jewish forces. And in Bavli he is called Bar Kochva, and he is Ben Koziba. And the Romans pulled a dirty trick on Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi, who was the great Tana. And in those days leading up to the Churban of Beitar, it was already after the devastation in Yerushalayim, after Churban Abayis. And they wanted to bring about the downfall of the Jews. And they knew how. So Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi davened every day a very simple tefillah. Elokim al teshuv b'din hayom. So they sent a young kuti to whisper into the ear of Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi in the middle of davening. And they saw to it that there will be witnesses. And those witnesses told Ben Koziba that obviously Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi is secretly negotiating with the Romans, because they saw a kuti whispering into his ear. So Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi is brought for interrogation before Ben Koziba, and Ben Koziba asks him, are you secretly talking to the Romans? Are you negotiating behind my back? Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi says, never, no way. I have no contact with the Roman forces. So what did that kuti whisper into your ear? He was asked. And he says, nothing. Never happened. I don't know a kuti, and I don't recall ever a kuti sharing a secret with me. But Ben Koziba had testimony that he did. He kicked Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi and without intention killed him. And Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi died while being interrogated and questioned by Ben Koziba. And the tragic climax of the story is, in that very same day that Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi died, 400,000 warriors in Ben Koziba's army were vanquished, were killed. He himself was killed by the Romans, and Beitar fell. And then it was obvious to everyone that the one that kept the Romans at bay was not Ben Koziba, neither his mighty army. It was the tefillas of one great tzaddik, of Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi. His tefillah, Elokim al teshuv b'din hayom. Why do I tell the story? It's no longer Tisha B'Av. We're no longer mourning. I tell the story because Rabbi Loza Hamaydoi was honest when he said No one ever spoke to me. No one ever shared a secret with me. Because he was in the middle of davening. He wasn't aware that a kuti whispered into his ear. So I would say the chassid just wasn't aware that anybody spoke to him, anybody greeted him. And if he was aware, he didn't know who it was. But let's go back to the halachas I quoted. Many sources in Shas and in Shulchan Aruch, we learn the general halacha. You are not allowed to put your life in jeopardy. ונשמרתם מאוד לנפשתיכם. How do we define danger? Very difficult. We can't quantify sakana in numbers. It's more of a general understanding. So yes, a person is entitled to put himself in a very limited danger, what we in modern language defined as a calculated risk. And our children have some activities that are more dangerous than others. The safest way to get from point of departure to your destination is using your legs, like people have been doing since Adam Harishon. When I was a kid, all we had were bicycles and roller skates. Nobody today know what roller skates are. Probably you could find them in the museums. So bicycles morphed into mountain bikes, electric bikes. Roller skates developed into rollerblades, and scooters, and electric scooters. And the latest is the hoverboard. And all these devices definitely are more dangerous, more hazardous than just using your feet. Is that an isur? I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, statistically, they're more dangerous than walking, but still, if you follow the rules, you ain't reckless and irresponsible, and you use these various different devices and gadgets in a responsible fashion, then the sakana is minimal, very remote. So yes, you are entitled to put yourself in a remote danger just for quality of life. So people, vacation time, go out to the mountains, and they jump off cliffs, they jump out of planes, and they do paragliding and hot air balloons and many different things. And they do African safaris, and you sit at an open platform jeep between a pride of lions, and your instructor tells you that human beings aren't on the menu of lions, which is probably right, until one crazy lion will prove it wrong. And then we'll need to come up with a different theory or change the rules. So, are these all prohibited? Is it an isur? No. Because the danger is remote. If you're not going to jump off that jeep and make faces and call those lions to attention, then you're relatively safe. Statistically, you're safe. So there's a tshuva noide b'Yehuda, very important and fascinating tshuva. Yoredei Amadurat and Yonah Simin Reishu. The noide b'Yehuda was asked, is it legitimate to go hunting? Once it was considered a legitimate pastime, not in the modern world. So the nobles in Europe loved to hunt. You took a shotgun, you went out to the forest, and you just killed animals for the fun of it. Many people ask me, is it legitimate to go fishing? Take a rod and a hook and go fishing. Many people find it very calming and good for your nerves. I find it disturbing because you catch a fish, you tear its lip with your hook, and then you just toss it back into the river, inflicting pain just for the joy of it. I mean, it's a fundamental halacha. And I spoke about this a few weeks ago. We had a special shiur on Tzar Balachayim, and I say, we don't need to be frommer than the Avos Hagdoshim and Chas v'Sholom Toras Hashem. So how did Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak and Yaakov get around? Well, v'yachbesh es chamoiroi. They rode mules, camels. So Tzar Balachayim is mutar l'tzoyrech odom. But how do we define tzoyrech? So I'm not going to get into this again. It's a huge discussion. But the Noida Buddha was asked, is it okay to go hunting? His punchline, the climax of the tshuva is, might be permissible of pi halacha, but the only two hunters that we find in Tanakh were Esav and Nimrod, and none of them is a role model for our children. So the Noida Buddha recommends a more Torah-dik pastime than killing animals just for the fun of it. But anyway, what's relevant to our sugya, the Noida Buddha says, but you're putting your life in jeopardy. You're going into the forest and you're going to be there with the bears and the wolves and the lions. And so the Noida Buddha writes, but if you want to hunt kosher animals to eat their meat, then for Parnasa you're allowed to put your life in sakana. I think the Noida Buddha was either naive or he didn't really know why people hunt. You don't hunt cows or sheep or chickens. You hunt animals that most of them ain't kosher. And even the kosher ones, you might shoot a deer. But that's not l'tzorech parnasa. You don't do it for a livelihood. But the Noida Buddha is machadash a gewaldige chiddush, and he says, you're allowed to put your life in jeopardy for parnasa. And he proves this point from two Gemaros in Bava Metzia, Tzadik Beis and Kuf Yud Beis. V'achaltu anovam kin nafshecha. It is from this posuk that we learn the din of achilas poyalim. Person that works in agricultural fields is entitled to eat from the fruit or the vegetables that he is plucking off the trees. And the Gemara says, Oile be'ilan, oile bekevish, mafres liyam, to bring parnasa. So the Noida Buddha says, this Gemara proves you're entitled to put your life in danger for parnasa. And I wonder, where do we find this halacha? Is parnasa doiche pikuach nefesh? Why? Why have a parnasa that puts your life in danger? Why not leave it to others? Wouldn't the Torah require a person should have a different parnasa in which he doesn't need to put his life in danger? Lanias daiti, it's not a special din regarding parnasa. One could generally say, as I argued before, there's a certain minimal level of sakana which is very remote, which is not a prohibition. But the Seichel HaYosher, common sense, will dictate that the more important the endeavor, the more legitimate it is to put yourself in any level of sakana. And you always need to take into account, why? Why am I doing this? For what? So yes, people enjoy skiing. And when I was young, I dreamed that maybe one day I'll do it. But with time, you've put aside many dreams. I hope I fulfilled most of the more important dreams I ever had. And I set aside many of those that are of a lesser importance. So yes, Masam b'chol yom. Skiing is more dangerous than walking. Riding a bike is more hazardous than walking. Jumping off a cliff with a parachute definitely is more dangerous than sitting on a bench at the top of that cliff and enjoying the scenery, enjoying the nuff. So a person is allowed to take certain calculated risks for the quality of life as well. So could we clearly define what is defined as a sakana? No. But we could clearly say some things that definitely are a sakana. Going into the ocean to swim, there's no lifeguard, is a sakana. And so many precious lives were lost to drowning. I could name 50 people that I knew that drowned. And every year, Bein Hazmanim, in Europe, in America, and in Israel, we're losing people to the water, to the oceans, the rivers, and the lakes. Going out to the desert without an ample supply of water is a sakana. Getting on any boat, kayak, canoe, rowboat, paddleboat, any boat without an efficient life jacket, life vest, is a sakana. And these are definitely osur isur dioraisa. So it is difficult to define exactly what is the level of sakana. But many times I say it all depends what you want to achieve. And I want to give an example, and a very important and alumdish example, which I think is fascinating. So, when this country will be run al pi halacha, and b'derech hatev, it's not that far off, will we abolish and dismantle the fire departments, rescue divers, yechidot chilutz that save people every year from the desert, from the wadis, from the valleys? Does a decent society, would it require cops to patrol the streets in Baltimore or in the Bronx, or there are some neighborhoods in America which are very unpleasant? Every decent society expects some of its members to volunteer for jobs and for service that does involve a higher level of risk than other endeavors. Is that legitimate al pi Torah? So in my Sforim, Shalosh Shuas Mechasor Shechelek Aleph Chelek Beis, I wrote at great length about the level of sakana one is required or entitled to take upon himself to save another person from sakana. But I do think that al pi Torah as well, we would expect some people to volunteer to serve the community, service that does involve a higher level of sakana. During the outbreak of COVID-19, which to our dismay is not over yet, in the East Coast in America you feel relatively safe, and Eretz Yisrael we're in the midst of a huge second wave. Hashem Yerachim. Doctors put themselves in risk, and medical professionals were affected, and a higher percentage of medical professionals did get COVID than general population. I'm so careful with the privacy of people. Right now in Yerushalayim, a wonderful doctor, a great doctor, and such a Tayar Yid is ill with COVID-19. For 5 months he's been working on the floor in the Corona department, and he wasn't infected. His boy came home from yeshiva, and that's when his father, the doctor, got COVID-19. 5 months he's working in the department, and he was safe. His boy came home from yeshiva, and then he fell ill, and he was desperately ill, and his life was in sakana. Spoke to him yesterday, and I was overwhelmed with joy when he called me with his beautiful voice, and Baruch Hashem, he's doing much, much better. But doctors and nurses, especially the first wave, put their lives in jeopardy. They didn't have protective gear, yet nobody really knew what we're dealing with. It was so unfamiliar. So yes, a decent society expects some of its members to come forward and to serve the community, put their lives in somewhat a higher level of risk than others. This is especially obvious with firefighters. Firefighters sometimes die fulfilling their duties. Rescue divers jump out of helicopters 30 feet into the ocean to rescue people that are drowning. Is this legitimate al pi halacha? I think so. And my raya is from Choshe Mishpat, Simen Yud Beis. Lo taguru mipnei ish. Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs and a Mishnah Torah Shoiftim as well, and Hilchos Sanhedrin quotes the Safri. A dayan shouldn't say Shemo Yaharig es beni. I'm afraid that this person, this criminal, might hurt a member of my family. I think just 2-3 weeks ago, the son of a judge in America was murdered. So the Safri says, And the Rambam quotes the Sifri, a judge cannot say, I'm afraid he might kill my son. The Mahari ben Lev, I don't know the exact source, but some Sforim quote it. The son of the Mahari ben Lev was murdered by a Baldin that the Mahari Lev paskined against him. And his son was murdered. I assume that when the claimant and the defendant are Reb Zushima Anepoli and Reb Yisrael Salanter, the Dayan doesn't need to be afraid Shemo Yaroig is Beni. He could be totally calm. If the Dayan has a bad feeling Shemo Yaroig is Beni, probably the guy he is judging is a thug. So, if there is a substantial sakana, then the Beis Din or the Melech are responsible to give protection to this Dayan. But not always is there an obvious sakana. But nevertheless, the Sifri says, a Dayan cannot say Shema Yareg is Mani. And why is that? Because if you would be afraid, then Leis Din Veleis Dayan, who will do the job. And this service is so fundamental and essential. Ishes re'eyu chayim below, im leis din veleis dayan. And therefore we tell Dayanim, you volunteer to this job. No one forced you to do so. This is what it requires. The same regarding doctors, or policemen, or firefighters, or rescue divers. Yes, we learn from Hilchas Dayanim. If the service is so essential and so important, v'i efshar la'olam, without the service, still, you can't kill yourself, but you are entitled to take upon yourself a higher level of sakana than in other endeavors. So to me, this is a milsa de pshita. And it also gives some added understanding in the Noide B'Yehuda that for Parnasa you could put your life in jeopardy. Yes, Parnasa is important. And therefore for Parnasa you could put your life in a somewhat higher level of danger, even though Parnasa is not doicha pikuach nefesh. So once again, we discuss various different concepts of sakana and menias of sakana. But the reason I'm saying this shiur is because we're still at the beginning of Bein Hazmanim. If as a result of this shiur, one life will be saved, and one youngster will understand, I'm not getting onto this boat. I'm not going into the Kinneret. I'm not going into the river. There's no lifeguard around here. If one life will be saved, Yehi ze schori, no greater schus. Kol ha'makayim nefesh achas miYisrael kilu kiyam olam molei, kol ha'ma'abed nefesh achas miYisrael kilu ibed olam molei. And every young yeshiva boy, for stepping into the water, for getting on the boat, just think about his father and mother, his brothers and sisters, his Zaidi and Bubby, how precious he is to them. Take care. As precious as you are to your parents and your siblings, you're precious to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you life. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to live. Al korchacho atu chai, and you have no right to put your life in jeopardy. Hishom alocho v'shmor nafshechu moed pen tishkach es advorim ונשמרתם moed לנפשתיכם. One additional comment, going back to the Marsha. So Marsha says these psukim don't refer to preventing danger. The Marsha is right, lefi pshuto shel mikro. When we learn the context of Parshas V'eschanan, it's clear. Of course the Marsha is right, but the Rambam is right as well. Pshuto shel mikro ki Marsha. Drush ki Rambam v'Shulchan Aruch. Elu v'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. So let's dedicate a few moments to the Marsha. Your life is precious. Your neshama even more. Bein Hazmanim has dangers and pitfalls not only for your physical existence and your life, for your neshama as well, and we all know that. When you leave yeshiva, you leave the Beis HaMedrash, you're in danger. Yes, your spirituality is in jeopardy. To my dismay, this wasn't a normal Zman. Thousands upon thousands of boys are not in yeshiva. Thousands of wonderful young B'nai Torah in America who are waiting to come back to the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael. So yes, I said many times, closing shuls is not a tragedy. It's profoundly sad. But in Eretz Yisrael, when we closed shuls, 1,000 minyanim sprang up in every park, every backyard, every merpeset, every porch. Every home became a Beis Medrash, every park became a Beis Medrash. And most people kept on davening with minyanim. And even those parts in the world which people daven b'yachidus, they davened. Thousands of Balabatim learned more in this period than they ever did before, because they didn't go to work. There were so many shiurim. I myself gave hundreds of shiurim in this period. It was an amazing privilege. Closing shuls is profoundly sad, but it's not tragic. Closing yeshivas is tragedy. Closing yeshivas is tragic. Because if young boys are out of yeshiva for 6 months, that is a grave danger. That is putting the future of our young children in jeopardy. So we need to do the utmost to prevent this danger as well. ונשמרתם מאוד לנפשתיכם. Hishama lachu v'shmor nafshechu ma'od, says the Mashor. It refers to your neshama, and it does. That is pshuto shel mikra. So I hope in this Bein Hazmanim, our wonderful children will stay away from danger, physical and spiritual. Look after your life and look after your real life. חיי בעלי החוכמה ומבקשהו ללא התעלמות כמיסה חשובים. That is death, not life. I just quoted the Lashon of the Rambam. פרק זין מהלכס רוצח. I also feel that when so many people are in pain and in mourning and in suffering, so as I said before, in Eretz Yisrael, we're in the midst of a second wave. Just this past week, so many people passed away from our community. A Satmar Chosed that was 40 years old. A Sadegera Chosed that was 60-something. Person I knew very well, Reb Tzvi Halevi, a wonderful person. Tsanua, Talmud Chochem, a real chassid, and what a Balmidus. Battled corona for a month, and it took him away. To the tragic loss of his family and others. People are dying. People are suffering. I spoke to a 30-year-old woman, mother of children, tested positive Pesach, tested negative 3 months ago, and she still has difficulty breathing. She's still suffering, and the doctors have nothing really to offer. They just hope she'll get better. When we talk about statistics, yes, it's true. The vast majority of people just get over it relatively easy. That's true. But I always say when we deal with a pandemic, the 95% is an irrelevant number. The only number that's relevant is the 5% or the 4% or the 3%. It's totally irrelevant how many don't suffer. What is relevant is the ones that'll die, and we could have prevented it. They didn't need to die. If we would all take the proper precautions, we could prevent this. So what is relevant is the number of people that are suffering. Yes, in the statistics, yeah, they're fine, but they're not fine. And there are many. I think in a time like this, we should also have somewhat less fun. Kishiyasol b'tzar, we need to be part of that. So I think we shouldn't have that much fun as we usually have, Bein Hazmanim. I think this Bein Hazmanim should be somewhat more subdued. Kids are going to camp, and they're coming home with corona. I would be happier if kids would stay at home with their families. We didn't do enough learning this entire Zman, so maybe let's try to make up for it Bein Hazmanim. So the message I wish to convey is twofold. ונשמרתם מאוד לנפשתיכם, stay away from danger. Stay away from putting your lives in jeopardy. Care for your neshamas as well. Spend more time at home, spend more time in Beis Medrash, spend more time learning. We're in the midst of Shiur Denachemta, after the sad days of mourning, climaxed on Tisha B'Av. The Rishonim say, when Tisha B'Av is over, you need to be a simcha. Simcha Satayra, Simcha Samitzvah, and the simcha of Tzipiyah Liyeshua. We should be Zoicha B'Korah B'Yameinu. Kodesh Baruch Hu should be Menachem Us B'Kiflayim. And when we will participate and partake B'Nachomas Tzir V'Yerushalayim, that will also be the Nachama of all those individual families. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yoimer Elokeichem. Kodesh Baruch Hu should be Menachem Us B'Kiflayim, and we should see the Simchas Yisrael B'Bias Goyal Tzedek B'Mheiro V'Yomeinu. Amen.